Hello everyone, how are you doing? We're back with a second installment of what we've called Producer Table Talks. And what that is where we take some of the brief little producer tips that we've done in these little 60-second clips that we do, and we're expanding on it a little bit, just chasing after, teasing out some of these ideas that are embedded in these little talks that I give. And last time we talked about samples, and I thought that was really fun. This time we're going to talk about something else, and we're joined here always now on Producer Table Talks by Jackson Malden. How you doing, Jackson?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so in one of our past producer tips, you went into how you'll use de-essing in a non-traditional way as sort of a way of dealing with cymbal bleed and cleaning some of that up. So I just thought maybe we could go more in depth on that and some non-traditional uses for the de-esser.
Okay, yeah, so that's a fun one. Because if you don't know, a de-esser, what it is essentially a compressor, okay? But it's a compressor that is frequency-based. That is to say, instead of the volume or the velocity of a source triggering a threshold or something like this, rather what's triggering the compressor is a frequency that you've dialed in, and that's what a de-esser is. And typically, the way people use that is they use it on a vocal, right?
Right.
Because, vocals are just really tough. There's a lot of frequency range there, and there's sibilances when you say S and ch, these sorts of sounds. Sometimes that can just really overpower a microphone, and it'll just be unnaturally loud compared to the rest of the vocal.
Right. The de-esser normally is just used to kind of clean up those harsher vocal sounds.
Yeah.
That's what people think of whenever they think of a de-esser.
Yeah, because what the de-esser does, since it's a compressor, it just like when that sound, that sibilant sound, hits the that de-esser, that frequency-based compressor. You dial it in. It's usually around 4 or 5K. That's kind of where that stuff is.
Yeah.
When it hits it, then it just compresses it down, but it comes back. It's not a static move, and so it's nice because it's just sort of dipping it when those things happen in the vocal.
Yeah.
And instead of just through the whole vocal, because that frequency range, let's say 4 or 5K, you're going to want that. In other places when they're not making those sounds with their mouth, S's and these sorts of sounds. Right. So that's the way de-essers have always been used. That's what they were invented for, and that's awesome. And of course, I use them in that way.
Right.
But we talked in the producer tip video that time about how when you're recording drums, you want if you've got a great room you're working in, you want to be able to use a mic that's further away from the drum kit, right?
Yeah.
We talk about miking out a drum kit, right? We put mics real close to all the drums, right inside the kick and right on top of the snare, over the toms, close mics. And we do that because we need the attack that you get from those close mics.
Right.
But that's not how drum sounds.
Right.
You don't go up to a drummer and say, play me your best groove and stick your ear right with the snare. First of all, you'd be deaf. But that's not how we hear it. We hear it, from a distance, right? Several feet back.
We hear the context of the room in drums.
That's right. The room is playing a role in the way those drums sound. The sound develops in the room. And so when you record drums, you can't just put close mics on it. If you want it to sound natural. And of course, this is what we're going. You can do whatever you want. That's the thing about production. If you want it to sound weird, then by all means, just put close mics on it. But if you want it to sound like a drum kit, then you need to, you put overheads, drums, mics over the drum. So primarily you're trying to pick up cymbals. But a lot of times people use overheads not only for cymbals, but also to get sort of a picture, a more ambient or natural picture of the drum kit. And then another thing you do is maybe put mics back further away from the drums in your room.
Yeah.
If you have a room that sounds nice, where the ambient sounds nice in your room. And I do that all the time, and a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
And the only problem is it sounds fine, but when you get in, and it always sounds amazing when you're doing it. You're like, this is so awesome. But when you get into the mix, you realize very quickly that you've got some limitations. You cannot turn those mics up as loud as you want to, because the cymbals are all over them, of course, right? And the cymbals are just overpowering on the rest of the drums. And so people have tried all kinds of things. Put the mics low. There's just all sorts of little tricks that you do. Use ribbon mics because instead of condenser mics because they're a little duller. Stuff like that. But the trick that I've come to use is a de-esser on your room mics.
Right.
It's amazing because you dial in that range. It's honestly, it's about the same range as you would use it on a vocal, something like that, kind of upper mids,
How convenient.
Yeah, how convenient. But, a de-esser, you can change where the frequency is, but generally it's still something like 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 8K, something like that.
Yeah.
And you set the threshold to where when he hits the snare, the drummer or her hits the snare, it's not moving the de-esser very much, but when he hits the cymbals, that's what's really activating and animating that de-esser.
Right. So it makes it manageable. You can get some more of the drum sounds out without the cymbals just overtaking the entire room mic.
Exactly, and that's essentially what happens. Is he hits the cymbals, that de-esser, that frequency-based compressor pulls that frequency down, those are high frequencies, right?
Right. Exactly.
So it tucks it down, and as they're decaying, it comes back up. And you're hearing the skins, the kick and the snare and the toms,
right?
And the part that you really want to hear on your room mics.
Yeah.
And it's surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it all go away, but you probably don't even want that exactly.
Right. You want some of the cymbal. Then it wouldn't sound natural, and that's really the point of the room mic at the end of the day.
You just want to control it. You just want to get it under control. And essentially what you're able to do is you're able to just push them up as loud as you might like to.
Right.
Whereas before you had to have less of it in there. Just couldn't use as much of it as you wanted to. And this kind of gives you the ability to use it much more or use it as loud as you'd like to in the mix.
Right.
And it goes a long way for making your drum sound real and authentic and organic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, are there any other non-traditional, let's say, ways that you would use a de-esser, or is that really it for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I've got something that's very closely related.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it a de-esser, but it's the same idea. It's a frequency-based compressor, a multi-band compressor.
Okay.
I'm sure a lot of you guys and gals have heard of a multi-band compressor.
Certainly.
That's what a de-esser is, except it's not multi-band.
Right.
It's just one band of it, right?
Yeah.
But a multi-band compressor is still a frequency-based compressor. It's just that you can use more than one. You can compress more than one frequency at a time.
Okay.
And so the benefit of that is again, you can use more than one at a time. But even if you're only using one of those bands, you have many more options to choose from about where you're compressing.
Right.
Right. Whereas a de-esser has a range that you can choose from, but it's in that upper mid, lower, that mid range to high end range.
Right.
And so, I use multi-band compressors a lot.
Yeah.
And so this is, here's some examples of ways that we do that. And it's always to kind of fix, I don't want to call them problems, but let's just call them anomalies in a source, right?
Right.
They're like a vocal, I think, is a great example of this. You've got a singer that their voice sounds amazing. They're going to have certain frequencies in their voice that are a little much.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're not a good singer or that they're not singing good. It just means that part of their voice that frequency range in their voice is a little louder than you might want it to be. So we'll take, for instance, a female singer. It's very common for a female singer, especially if she has a higher voice, like a soprano, for that kind of maybe a 3K range, for it to really, when she's belting it out, for that to be really
present.
A lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it sounds great and you're like, this is awesome, but wow, this is strong.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to just go in around 3 or 4K or 2 to 3K or whatever it is. You don't want to just go in and just with an EQ and just pull it down.
Right.
Maybe you can a little bit. But the thing is, when what we were talking about when you're de-essing a vocal, is you don't want that frequency altogether gone all the time.
Right.
There are times when she's not really singing high.
Yeah.
And that frequency range sounds very nice.
Yeah, you're not trying to just get rid of 3K.
Right, yeah, you don't want to just get rid of it altogether. You just want, when it really piles up, when it's really, barking at you, you just want it to dip down then.
Right.
And so a compressor is a great way to do that because it's not a static move. EQ is a static move. That means you make the move and that's it.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
So obviously I use EQ, but I try not to get too radical with it on areas like that. I try not to fix a bunch of stuff with EQ. I fix things, I usually do in stages. I fix it a little bit with the EQ. Maybe not as much, maybe not so much that it solves the problem, but it just helps a little.
Yeah.
And then maybe get the rest of the way there with a multi-band.
Right. So EQ is more like your basic, overall settings, and then the compression will clean up just those parts where it
Right.
gets a little too much.
Yeah. So that's an example, say on a female voice, something like that, like a high mid or something like that, when they're really belting it out. A lot of times, this can be true on a female or a male. A lot of times when they get down in the lower part of their voice, there's kind of a range, like let's call them low mids, okay?
Yeah.
200 hertz to 300 or 400 hertz, something like that, where it's kind of a boxy sound, okay? And then sometimes it can really kind of bloom, woo, woo, like really, they'll sing a note, and that low mid range really piles up and just kind of overpowers the mix. Like if you guys have ever like been working on a mix and you're trying to get the vocal up loud enough, and there's a spot in the song where it just like it feels so low and you can't turn it up enough.
Right.
That's because probably somewhere in those low mids, they're really blooming and piling up. Well, you can EQ it a little bit, just like
Right.
you did that top end, but there again, you don't want to just like completely take it out with EQ. You want something to take it out when it's a problem.
Right.
And
exactly.
a multi-band compression is great for that. Then you're sort of using a band somewhere around in that 200 to 400 range. You have to sort of dial it in, find where it's really happening, right? You use your ear, dial it in, and then have that multi-band compressor kind of dip it down when that happens. And it's a great solution for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that that's some other ways that we might use. Instead of EQ, use like a frequency-based compressor to solve anomalies or problems that we have in the mix.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation about frequency-based compression, de-essers, and multi-band compression, all these things. We really enjoyed this. Guys, if there's anything y'all want to hear us talk about, you want to hear our 2 cents on it, feel free to leave it in the comments. We'd love to answer your questions. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Adios.